I had spent my entire life refusing to feel anything that could make me weak. Listening was losing. Vulnerability was suicide. What if Atlas 3 I wasn't crossing space, but crossing my life? I said it quietly, as though the words might shatter the silence I had paid so dearly to maintain. I am the billionaire who refused redemption. And Atlas 3 I was sent to force me to listen. Hearing myself admit it felt like the floor shifted beneath my feet. The secret observatory, hidden deep in the Swiss Alps and accessible only by private cable car and retinal scan, suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb I had built for myself. The walls were black glass and carbon fiber, the air sterile and cold, my Brioni suit and charcoal turtleneck immaculate as always. Everything in my life was designed to be untouchable silence. Tonight that silence screamed. Atlas 3 I appeared on the main screen without warning. An elongated ancient rock veined with slow pulsing teal fractures that breathed in perfect rhythm. Deliberate, alive, impossible to dismiss. I had tracked it for months, convinced it was just another anomaly I could own or ignore, but the rhythm of those pulses matched something inside my chest I had spent 35 years trying to bury. My hand trembled as I reached for the console. I hated that tremor, the same tremor that used to appear when I was 12 and waiting for my father to look up from his desk and finally see me. I told myself it was altitude, nothing more, but the lie tasted like my father's voice. The memory came uninvited, sharp as broken glass. I was 12, standing in his study, holding the model rocket I had built for 3 months without sleep. I had launched it alone because he was always too busy. It flew higher than any kid's rocket should. I ran to show him, eyes burning with pride. He looked up from his papers for 3 seconds, said, "It's adequate." But adequate isn't enough, and went back to work. That day I learned that nothing I did would ever be enough, not for him, not for anyone. That day I learned redemption was impossible, nothing would ever be enough. The screen flickered. Every calculation collapsed into the same pattern, a triangle divided into 3 glowing layers, repeating, insisting. The same symbol that haunted my dreams since the day he died and left me everything except approval. The air in the observatory grew suddenly heavy, almost warm. My vision blurred at the edges. My pulse slowed, then matched the comet's rhythm exactly. I gripped the edge of the console to stay upright. Something was coming. I could feel it rising through my chest, like a tide I had held back my entire life. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. The pattern had finished building itself while I watched, and the message was no longer a question. It was a command. The triangle pulsed again on every screen. Coordinates appeared beneath it. Precise, undeniable. They pointed to one place I had sealed off 15 years ago. The family mansion in the hills where he died, where I became heir to everything and nothing. I laughed once, a short hollow sound. Redemption? I didn't want redemption. I wanted to be left alone. But the triangle kept pulsing. The comet outside the dome pulsed with it. I already knew I would go. I left the Alps before the sun rose. The Rolls-Royce Phantom Autonomous Edition waited on the private airstrip. Matte black, doors already open, interior lit in cold amber. I slid into the back seat without a word to the driver who wasn't there. The car sealed with that familiar hollow click, and the car pulled away on its own. The triangle was still on my wrist, 3 glowing layers now complete. Pulsing in perfect rhythm with the comet I could no longer see but still felt. I tried to work. I tried to sleep. I tried to pretend the coordinates were just numbers. None of it worked. The highway unrolled in silence. Every mile felt like peeling off a layer of skin I had worn for protection. I closed my eyes and the memory came anyway, louder than the engine that didn't make a sound. I was 12, standing in the living room of the mansion. We were now approaching. I held the science project I had worked on for weeks, a circuit board that could power a small drone for 30 minutes straight. I had done it alone. I had stayed up nights. I had believed, for one stupid moment, that this time he would look at me the way fathers look at sons in movies. He sat behind the oak desk in his gray Brioni suit, silver hair perfect, eyes colder than the marble floor. I placed the board in front of him like an offering. He glanced at it for 3 seconds, picked it up, tore it in half, let the pieces fall. "This is not enough," he said, voice flat, final. "You will never be great if you keep bringing me almost." I stood there, throat on fire, hands shaking, while the broken wires sparked weakly on the rug. That was the day I stopped bringing him anything. That was the day I decided feeling was suicide. The car slowed. The mansion rose ahead. Dark, massive, exactly as I remembered. The gates opened on their own. Of course they did. I still owned the place. I just hadn't set foot inside since the funeral. I stepped out. The night air was colder here, heavier, like it carried the weight of every unsaid word. My shoes crunched on gravel that hadn't been touched in 15 years. I walked through the front door. The lights came on automatically, motion sensors I had installed and then forgotten. The entrance hall looked smaller. Or maybe I had grown too large for it. The triangle on my watch pulsed once, stronger now. I looked down. The third layer had filled completely while I wasn't watching. The message was no longer partial anymore. It was finished. I knew what it said without reading it. I had always known. I walked deeper into the house, past the study where he died, past the desk where he tore my project in half. The silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. I stopped in the middle of the corridor. My reflection stared back from a mirror I had avoided for 15 years. The man in the Brioni suit looked perfect. But his eyes were the same 12-year-old boys, still waiting for a nod that would never come. The comet pulsed again, one single, deliberate beat. As if to say, "Hey, you came back. Now listen." I closed my eyes. The silence wasn't punishment anymore. It was the only place left where the truth could finally speak. And for the first time, I didn't try to silence it. I left the corridor without turning on more lights. The mansion knew I was here. That was enough. My footsteps echoed like accusations on the marble floor. I walked straight to the study, the way a condemned man walks to the gallows. The oak desk was exactly where it had always been. The leather chair still faced the window. The air smelled of old paper and the ghost of his cologne. I stood in the doorway and felt 12 years old again. The triangle on my wrist pulsed, 3 layers now blazing, no longer waiting. I didn't try to silence it. I was done pretending I was in control. I crossed the room in 4 steps and stopped in front of the desk. My reflection stared back from the dark window, older, richer, emptier. I placed both palms on the cold wood, exactly where his hands used to rest. The surface was smooth, flawless. Just like he demanded everything to be, my throat closed. I had come here to prove I was stronger than this place. Instead, I felt smaller than ever. The comet pulsed again, harder this time. The triangle burned against my skin. The room lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Only the teal glow from my watch and the faint light of Atlas 3I through the window remained. Then the air changed. It grew thick, almost liquid. My vision tunneled. A pressure built behind my eyes. Not pain, but inevitability. I didn't fight it. The study dissolved. Suddenly I was old, 60, maybe 70, sitting alone in this same chair. The desk was covered in dust. The empire was gone. The company sold. The money meaningless. No one had come to the funeral. No one remembered my name. I reached for a photograph that wasn't there anymore. My hand shook exactly the way it did when I was 12. And in the silence I heard my own voice. Thin, ancient, broken. This is not enough. The vision vanished. The study snapped back. I was on my knees. I didn't remember falling. The comet pulsed one final time, slow, deliberate, merciless. The triangle on my watch went dark. I understood. Everything I built was just a longer, more expensive way of hearing my father say those words again. I stayed on the floor until the first light of dawn crept through the window. The silence wasn't screaming anymore. It was listening. I stood up slowly. My legs were steady. My hands weren't shaking. I knew where I had to go next. The Rolls-Royce waited exactly where I had left it, patient as ever. I didn't get in right away. I stood barefoot on the gravel, jacket left inside the mansion, and let the cold bite my skin until it stopped hurting. Then I opened the door myself, something I hadn't done in 15 years, and drove. The road down the hills was empty. The first light of dawn painted the sea far below in liquid gold. I followed it without thinking, without checking the GPS, without caring where it ended. The comet was no longer visible, but I could still feel its rhythm inside my chest. Slower now, almost gentle. The asphalt gave way to sand. I stopped the car, stepped out, and walked until the waves touched my feet. The water was cold, but it didn't shock me anymore. It felt like the first honest thing that had ever touched me. The wind carried the scent of salt and beginning. I rolled up the sleeves of the white shirt I had underneath, the one I never wore because it was too soft, too human. For the first time, softness didn't feel like defeat. The sun broke the horizon completely. Golden light flooded everything. The air grew warm, dense, alive. My vision blurred at the edges, not from tears this time, but from something larger. I recognized the sensation. I didn't fight it. The beach transformed. I saw people walking slowly along the water, barefoot, smiling without reason. Children built castles that didn't need to impress anyone. Men and women sat together in silence, hands resting on each other's arms like connection was the most natural thing in the world. No one was rushing, no one was proving anything, no one was measuring worth. And in that world I saw myself, older, lighter, hair touched with silver, eyes soft, shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled high. I was laughing at something a child said. I was listening. I was enough, not because of what I had built, but because I was simply there. The vision settled inside my chest like the sunrise itself. I inhaled, and the last piece fell into place. Redemption wasn't a prize I had to earn. It was the freedom I had denied myself the day I decided feeling was suicide. Tomorrow I would call the people I had pushed away and say the words I never allowed. I was wrong. I needed you. I was afraid. I would stop measuring my worth by how little I needed anyone. I would let myself feel again, even if it hurt. I would listen. I walked back across the sand, barefoot, sleeves rolled, jacket left behind forever. The rising sun painted everything gold. The waves whispered without demanding an answer. The wind carried salt and freedom. I smiled at the new day, a real smile. The kind that starts in the chest and reaches the eyes. The car engine hummed in the distance, patient. I had all the time in the world now. And I was ready. I was ready to live. If Atlas 3 I broke through every wall you built and whispered the one thing you've been running from your whole life. You never had to prove you were enough. Would you finally believe it? Tell me in the comments the thing you're still trying to prove. I read every single one. And if tonight's something inside you just let go, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening with your heart. See you in the next revelation.